And we are live on Leadership Redefined with Dr. Bernardo. Welcome, and we have Dr. Zacharis here as well. Welcome, doctor, lawyer extraordinaire, a little bit of everything. As Rich just mentioned off air, I think this is our first two-time guest, so you have the honor of that, Larry. I mean, how great is that? I mean, what other accolades do you need to, other than be a two-time guest on Leadership Redefined? I mean, that's got to be the pinnacle of your career. I mean, so far, is it not?
Very much humbled to be among my esteemed colleagues. So thank you for having me back.
So, Larry, for those audience members that did not, I don't know why they wouldn't watch the first podcast with you. I mean, they really lost out, and they should go back and watch it if they haven't. All kidding aside, it was great talking to you the first time. Can you just do a quick intro, and then we'll get into this, again, another transition that we're doing in the higher ed space where you are, but quick intro, and then we'll get into some cool conversation about what we are talking about moving back and what we have to consider too.
Sure. So thanks again for having me back, both of you. I appreciate it. My name is Larry Zacharis. I'm the interim chief of police and assistant vice president for campus safety and senior operations director for institutional resiliency at Stony Brook University. Been in the first part of that role for about 9 months now. Actually, it's been a while since we spoke. Been managing the COVID response and recovery for the better part of 14 plus months, and I've been there at the university in all of those positions for about 12 years now.
Wonderful, wonderful. So, and you, I guess, like many people, came into a role really under fire with COVID going on. And obviously you've adjusted pretty well. You're still here, right? So you've obviously adjusted pretty well. But Larry, we're getting into, I think everybody wants to obviously get back to as much normalcy as we can. I think everybody agrees that while we want to keep a lot of what we had and learned from in this virtual space, we want to keep the positive components of that. We really, the goal has always been to get in higher education, K-12, get kids back to campus, get people back into the face-to-face, where face-to-face is the way the chosen modality. So what are some of the things that you in your role at really high level at the institution have to consider, and what are some of the processes that you're sort of going through to get there? Because we know it's not, for the audience, it's not, hey, snap your fingers and we're there. There's a lot of push and pull. There's a lot of things going on behind the scenes, and whatever you could share would be awesome.
Sure. Thanks again. You know, we're at this very critical point where we're winding down the semester, only a few weeks left, you know, where the lion's share of our classes were online or hybrid. And we're getting to a point where we're thinking to the fall and thinking to the future. And a lot of the assumptions we're making are just that. They're assumptions based on guidance that has not necessarily been released. And I'll talk about one that you mentioned, you know, even before we got on air. So the K-12 guidance from the CDC, reducing the footprint from 6 feet down to 3 foot, has not been adopted for higher ed yet. And there's, you know, hundreds of guys and gals like me every day pushing their individual regulatory bodies, you know, for an answer, and to see local health department, state health department, in our case, SUNY, and many others, trying to identify, you know, what it's going to look like in the fall, while also knowing that, you know, our registration for the fall has already opened and is about to close. So we have to do some, I'll say, risk assessment and, you know, risk mitigation and a bit of a judgment call. You know, we are at a point where we know overwhelmingly students want to come back and want to be in the classrooms as our faculty. There are some things that will remain online because it worked. There are some things that will remain online unrelated for us, you know, due to some infrastructure issues and some rehabilitations of buildings would have happened even if there was no such thing as COVID. But we're about 25% hybrid and online, and 25% face-to-face, and 75% hybrid and online. And we're looking to flip that for the fall to really get, you know, folks back. So
yeah, that's really interesting. And just to contextualize, every 3 feet versus every 6 feet, like what does that mean in real world context for what you have to plan for? Or you know what I'm saying? Like just try to put a picture on that for the audience.
So, the vast majority, especially, so it seems silly, but the reality is a practical application of that. So a classroom that has fixed seating, you're limited by that, based on the infrastructure, versus one that has movable seats and a lecture hall versus a smaller classroom. But the vast majority of our smaller classrooms, I'll say 50 or less, under non-COVID situations, were really not usable for us under the 6-foot rule. So we had a very limited inventory of what we could use. As we're starting to think about, that the CDC is out there now on the record with 3 feet, right? So we've been waiting for a couple of things. One, the vaccine. When we spoke, and even when this whole thing started, the vaccine was sort of our ticket to the end of or at least the beginning of the end of the pandemic. And we're at the point now where, statewide, we're probably at the 25, 28% of those vaccinated. Nationwide, things are moving a lot faster than I think even some experts thought. So we're headed in the right direction. It's not the end all be all, because as we've seen with the guidance, just because you're vaccinated doesn't mean the mask can come off, doesn't mean the social distancing necessarily gets relaxed. And there's now some diverging pieces of guidance. So the CDC is sort of looking at things, local health departments, we see it with, even today, opening up and loosening of restrictions for outdoor venues, for indoor venues, for bowling alleys, right? So it's this constant moving target. So for us to wait for the final word for the classroom, we simply couldn't do it. So we're doing a lot of things safe, erring on the side of caution, using science, using all those things. We're still going to continue to test in the fall, our students, faculty, and staff. We're having a major push, and we have had major pushes on vaccines. Stony Brook we have 2 sites, actually, state sites that we're running, and 250,000 of the 300,000 plus doses in Suffolk County have been administered in some way, shape, or form from a Stony Brook entity. So we're at the forefront of that.
So Larry, you also have to, like, as I'm thinking this through and talking, and Rich, I want to hear from you as well. You could figure this out, say it's 3 feet, say it's 6 feet, or say you scenario for both of those. Even those have to have fluidity, right? Those could change if the vaccine isn't working with a new strand or what it really. So how do you, from a leadership perspective, how do you plan for the fluid? And I know you've been doing this since the beginning, but the difference I think here is we're going to bring everybody back, right? And now it's like the fluidity has to be so prevalent in what you're planning for. How do you do that as a leader?
The biggest challenge is trying to, I'll say our registrar, our faculty for sure, and the people who are responsible for, figuring out the platform from which they're going to teach, right? So trying to keep them motivated, and after a year, a lot of back and forth, and are we in person? Are we online? Are there going to be vaccines available? So we've answered a lot of those questions. The good thing is that the folks who were comfortable will remain comfortable in the classroom. Those who are hesitant because of wanting to get the vaccine and or watching the infectivity rates, both locally, regionally, and on campus. We have been remarkably lucky. I shouldn't say lucky, because it's due to a lot of effort. We've been the benefactors of a very low rate the entire time. Even when we had decent cases in the community, we didn't necessarily see that on campus. So that's a positive as well. Check that box to assuage people's fears and make them more comfortable, both our faculty as well as our students in the classroom. And then it's just it's from the academic continuity standpoint that there's just some things that I'll give you an example. Anatomy and physiology, our gross anatomy lab, we made it work last year, but our future healthcare providers, of our world, don't want to be learning, dissecting a cadaver virtually. I mean, we can there; it's a supplement, but there's just some things that you can't really replicate, and that's a good example.
Rich, to you.
No, I keep hearing the word, and you're really a bad good example of this, Larry. I use the futuring. We all use the futuring word a lot among what we do, and in a certain sense, you're a bad example of what I'm driving at, and that's good. In the sense that just listening to you and listening to how you process, throw everything into a funnel up in your head, and everything kind of sifts through that process, and you sort out here's where I get more specific, the intersection of so many variables, from the size of a classroom to virtual versus actual cadaver dissection, and recognize how those intersections uh, ripple out to places that you may not necessarily future for if you didn't have a Larry at the helm. So I think I like the way I said that. I think that makes sense. So what I'm wondering about in terms of not necessarily Stony Brook as an organization, but I guess maybe in a wider sense, and maybe you can comment to this, is, the skills of a leader like yourself and the other leaders with whom you're obviously conversing have to be beyond the skills of leadership that we ordinarily associate with leadership. They have to be futurists insofar as whatever they're responsible for, to make all the wheels turn and make all the intersections align with each other. They need certain kinds of skills that I'm wondering about whether everyone in your view, or I'm not sure where I want to take the question, necessarily may have. Does that make sense?
Yeah, it does. And I think, at the risk of sounding pompous, because I never want to sound like that at all.
Go ahead, be pompous. You're entitled.
No, no, it's a unique skill set, some of which is really adaptable. Right. So it's that emergency risk mindset, right? To crisis response, crisis management. And that's been my life's work. And then some of it is just inherent to the different leaders that are at the table, this senior leadership team, and there's certainly many, there's hundreds of people that have been involved. But if you get to the core of it, it's not as many as people think. And I won't give you the number, because then, we don't want to, pull the curtain back and see the Oz pulling the controls. But it's the ability to be nimble, as we talked, last time. It's that flexibility, that pivot on the fly. Just when if you think you've seen it all, then you need to leave the room, because we know we haven't seen it all. And being ready and being resilient and being ready for the next challenge, and seeing those obstacles as challenges, and how to navigate around them. So, we went from, we need a vaccine, to not only did the vaccine come out, but now we're in the vaccine business, 24/7, literally 7 days a week on our campus, on our Southampton campus. We're doing pop-up locations. We're supporting Stony Brook Medicine is supporting the state and the county. And we're just involved in so many things. So even in the midst of building a field hospital last year and all the things we were doing, if you had asked me that Stony Brook would be so involved in the actual vaccine administration, I probably wouldn't have said yes. I wouldn't have said, no, we will turn that work down. But that's just a good example of how we play this regional role. And the people who are there making those decisions, like I said, are in that mindset, that crisis mindset, or they just have the leadership skill set that we never say no, and we can be flexible.
So Rich, I'll let you I just wanted to make one comment on, you mentioned pompous at the beginning of this. You don't want to sound pompous. And I actually think the irony is that your humility and your openness to see things on multiple perspectives, I think that's because a lot of people get pompous confused with confidence, right? I think you're confident based on your experience. And I just want to clarify what we know of you and what we've seen. It's really driven by, in my view, humility, setting your ego aside, and the ability to listen to all stakeholders and make a confident decision on what to do, but really not dismissing anyone around you. That's what I hear from you in these conversations. Is that accurate, Larry? Then Rich, we'll get to you as well.
Yeah, it is. My ego's been locked in a cage for the better part of 15 months, because we wouldn't have gotten here if you're 100% right. And I appreciate that distinction.
Rich, you had a comment? Yeah.
Yeah, this is going to sound so nerdy. I'm apologizing in advance. And I'm talking in abstract terms, Larry, but I think you're one of the best people I can think of to comment to this. Would we all whoever all is, be better served if somehow or another there was a more, and I hate this word I'm going to use, formal training of those kinds of mindsets and skills that you naturally practice with whomever your colleagues are? Would we not be better off if everyone were trained to think that way and know how to be agile that way. Because there's going to be all kinds of God forbids coming up the road. We have a lot of money coming from the federal government to universities and to K-12, where school systems and universities are going to be empowered to spend to react to the COVID crisis, to redo themselves. And I kind of wonder whether we, as a whole with a W, have the skill set as well as the mindset to skillfully future for what we have the opportunity to refine all of what we do.
I think I won't say two camps, because there's probably more than two, but let's say two clearly defined camps. Places, and I'll use the term, whatever places is, broadly, the broad spectrum of organizations and entities and businesses and individuals. Places that were successful and in some cases accelerated and artfully navigated this pandemic, did so, I think, with people at the helm that had experience and that were crisis management minded folks. And places that didn't do as well, or were stymied or just completely paralyzed with either fear or lack of preparation, did so because the people who were at the helm either didn't have the wherewithal to be able to see a couple of leaps ahead, or didn't have the skill set that said, we have to think. That's that broad spectrum, that while we're dealing with, this is the issue here, it's a public health crisis, but it's so much more, whether you're the local deli owner or you're, whoever you are. So is there a way, is the formalized training is in the form of people who embrace the practice of crisis management. And that can come in, it doesn't make a difference. That's just a leadership style, happens to be my profession and an overlay to my overall industry. So there is formalized training. And I do think that even if they were to embrace pieces of it, where you get that preparation hat on, the mindset, any business out there, if you don't have a business continuity plan if we didn't learn anything, we learned a ton about supply chain interruption. So it doesn't make a difference who you are. If you need a widget for your organization to run, the widget making business was an eye-opening experience during this pandemic. So that would just be one example.
Yeah. Okay, I hear you. I had a feeling that's pretty much what you're going to say, and I totally endorse what you're saying too. I just wondered sometimes whether folks, and I think I may have mentioned this to you another time, I don't know if school systems had any kind of, as a whole with a W, any kind of sense of crisis management and preparation for the things that have come at them. And they're lucky that they were able to at least manage to do what they've done in lots of ways, rather than just sort of switch a gear. And if your house loses power and you have a house generator, the button switches over and you have power again. But that's not the way so many places work, unfortunately. And it doesn't speak well for where we have to take ourselves.
No, and I think I might have mentioned this in the previous, our meeting together. Crisis management and emergency management preparation is similar to security. It costs a lot of money. Nobody really likes to talk about it. It's not that sexy, but when you don't have it, you realize and you wish that you did. So it's a complete, analogy here, where whether it's education, which we're talking about, the education sector, the healthcare sector kind of gets it because they're in that emergency, mindset. But the financial industry would be another sector that gets it. Their redundancies and backups, and to keep the financial sector running. So that doesn't necessarily spill over to other sectors.
And really, crisis management. We spoke a little bit about that fluidity earlier. It's a skill that, if you had significant or enough training on that, it's not just navigating a major crisis like we've seen. It's actually a skill set that helps, because what do you have? You need to be well informed. You need to have fluidity in your decision making. You need to involve all stakeholders, and then when it comes down to it, confidence to make those really challenging decisions quickly, right? And that's a skill set that transcends just a crisis. That's a skill set that you could leverage in everyday life, going all the way to parenting if you're a parent. Like, those are things that you really would be useful. And it's a shame that it is an afterthought, because it's something that would be so beneficial in higher ed and K-12 and organizations in general, to have that ability to navigate things and sort of slow time down when things do happen, because that's what when you have a good skill set down, or you've practiced something really, like you hear Major League Baseball players use it. They see these 99-mile, 100. They see these pitches in a slower form than we're thinking about. But why? Because they're trained. They have the skill set to do that. And similarly with crisis management, if they have those skill sets, they almost do it naturally if they're trained the right way. So I think it's a great point that you bring up. So Larry, we're just about at time. We would love to have you back as a 3-time guest at some point, whenever you are available. I think for our listeners, I hope that they're listening to what you have to say, not just of, I spoke, I don't know if it was the beginning or offline, about the multiple hats that you have and what those opportunities. I think we talked about that in the first podcast. If anyone wants to listen to that as well, and what it's done for you as a person, and the kind of leader you are. So hopefully people could listen in and just hear how you approach things, and just get a good knowledge base of how to do it sort of right, in my view. Rachel, I'll give you a last thought, and then Larry, you'll have the final thought as well. Rich?
Yeah, I'd like to see Larry demonstrate how he does some of these things.
Yeah.
The blackboard thing. I'm absolutely serious, because I think we just put our finger on the pulse of something that's really not, like you said, Al, really not the practice. It's not the norm.
Right.
Maybe the norm in certain sectors, like finance, obviously is a good example, and probably health up to a point. Certainly not education. Military comes to mind too, among other things. But it would be really interesting to try to encapsulate what I think we're touching, the three of us, into something that people might be able to take advantage of in terms of coming out of the other side of this crisis. No, I appreciate, Larry. It's not even, Larry, so much of what you say is what the sum of the ideas of what you say was what stirs us, and that's why we are so appreciative of having you on.
No, and again, I appreciate it as well. Well, there'll be some of those tidbits in my book when I eventually get around to writing it. We got to wait till the crisis is over, both from a time and a believable credibility standpoint. But to wrap up my final thoughts, I would say this. We touched on exactly what you just said. If there's anyone listening whose organization doesn't buy into it yet, if you spoke to Tulane University after Hurricane Katrina and the folks there, that's a mindset that they had. The 100-year flood that was never going to happen, a Category 5 storm. It's those never say nevers. That's the majority of the folks that you deal with in our business, and there's always the small vocal minority that says, you probably should listen to us. But we should have to prepare just in case, and that could transcend a lot of different pieces of it. So if anyone's listening that that has that. You got to work on it, and you have to get that cultural buy-in, institutional buy-in, and then try to find the folks who either have the skill set and get them to the table, or, search out and try to find them, because when the proverbial bell rings, you're going to need them for sure.
Thank you.
You said it better than I could.
So well said. And we'll listen, we'll have you on when that book comes out. We'll push you to finish up that book. I'm sure we'll be the first in line to have you on and to buy the book for sure. Thank you so much, Larry. Always a pleasure, and really, really glad you were able to come.